Okay, good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on the top of page 1303. Aleph Shin Gimel. Now, we essentially learned the context is the explanation of the verse, of the end of the verse, of Havai Yechata Meriva. So the end of the verse is Vayoram Keren Meshiche. The Vayoram Keren Meshiche is referring to Keren Malchus, which is like the Keren Zovius, the corner point that on one hand, it doesn't have any, it's not a Dover B'fnei Atzmei, it's not an entity of its own, because nothing else was added. It's just the meeting point, the juncture where two walls meet. On the other hand, that is the place where there is that meeting point, because the two walls could also not meet. East and south can each one be in their own reality. And here, at this point, they meet. Same thing with Malchus, is the level of Ayin, Lesla Megar Moklum. It has nothing of its own. And yet it is the place where Atzilus meets Bria. The words he said, Atzilus meets Atik of Bria. And he explained it further that even when Malchus becomes a structure, because you need Binyan Malchus in order for it to function. So firstly, as we just said, it is fundamentally, it's Netzal, is the way it emanates, is different than all the other spheres, only as a Nakuda, as a point. And even when you build it up, it's also different than the other spheres, because it's built from the Malchus of each of the other spheres. The Malchus of Chachma within Zah, the Malchus of Bina within Zah, and Malchus of every level is just like the Malchus in general of Atzilus doesn't have anything of its own. The Malchus of every level is just the Hisgalus, the revelation of that level. So there's what he calls there's no Hischachas Dover. On the other hand, by contrast, the other spheres, so firstly, they're not their Netzal. Each of them individually emanates, and God created them with an identity. Chesed is Chesed, it has parameters of Chesed, and Gvura is Gvura, and the same thing with each sphere. And even when they encompass one another, it's also due to it's not because the other spheres are influencing them, it's because each one of them has all the spheres within them, because they're all rooted in one place, which is where they were all joined together in the 10 hidden spheres, as he said. Whereas Malchus, like he says, just to read the words, Malchus netzal rak nekuda achas v'atves tesfiris hushemekabelas ma tesfiris dezah. And this, going back to Malchus now, is the vizeh we read. I'm just summing up what we read at the bottom of page 1302. This vizeh nasa b'yischabris da'atzilis imabriya. This happens. This Malchus comes to life in the joining of Atzilus and Bria. That means for the purpose for Atzilus to be able to create Biyah, and that they should join together. Atzilus shouldn't just remain in the world of Atzilus. And like he says afterwards, not just to create Biyah, but also to unite with Biyah. The two things that that exist in Malchus, that's where Malchus comes into play. Even is Bechinas HaMalchus, Bechinas Parsuf, because Malchus is the Gili of each sphere. And if there was no Velula Bechinas HaGil, Lo Yeh Bechinas HaMalchus. Okay, so that's why. So Malchus basically is all about this joining together. It's not here to come to create a new entity. It's here to join two things together, which is like the corner point. Like he said, I'm just moving to the top of page 13 through. That's al derech moshla keren she'ein bei shum ischachus b'teisvus davar. That's like the corner point that does not have anything new and any additional component. Rak shenasa memela. It only comes automatically through the chabrus of Beis Aksalim, through the joining of the two walls. K'moi Kain, reading line 6 on top of 1303. B'chinas HaMalchus ein adavar b'fnei atzmei, hainu she'ein b'zeh ischachus shirak sima atzilus. Malchus also doesn't have any entity of its own. All it is, nothing new. It's only the end of Atzilus, like the end of the wall, so to speak, of Atzilus. and Heim Shates Malchus b'chol Rak b'chinas Sim Atzilus and Sefiros shall call Sefiros. Okay, ukashem mischaber Atzilus Mabriya nasa b'chinas parts of Malchus me'eser Malchus Hanal sha'idezeu is chabes Atzilus Mabriya. So I know once he says 9 spheres, then he says 10, is because he's clearly counting the 10th sphere of Malchus itself. That's what it sounds like. So it's created from the 9 spheres, from Chachma through Yesod. And then the Eser Malchus are now, that comes the Chabes of Atzilus and Bria. So the only thing you could say was innovated or was something novel was created here is only the joining, but not an entity. The joining of two entities. So that's the place where Malchus is. It's the corner point between Atzilus and Bria. So that's where we stop by this parentheses. I'm just trying to figure out the Eser Malchus because he didn't say Eser till now. He kept saying 9. So he must say that he means the Malchus from Chachma through Chesed, through Yesod, that's 9 in Zah, and then he means the Malchus of Malchus. Probably, that's where it would be 10, most likely. Okay.
It's not the Malchus of Malchus. This is the Malchus. This is the essence of Malchus. All 9 are coming Ishleimus when it's reaching this.
We know that, but I'm just trying to explain why he calls it Malchus Me'eser Malchus Hanal. Before he said Tes Malchus, and now he's saying the word expression Eser Malchus. That's what I'm trying to explain. See the word Eser Malchus. Now, okay, so it's the Tes Malchus of Zoh, but it ends up being 10 spheres, 10 levels of Malchus. He does say clearly Tes Malchus earlier. Okay. So now let's continue from the line after the parentheses, so, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com, PDFs. And this is like, for example, like the kingship below. When you see a king, a leader, leading his subjects, his empire, he's going to use that as a mashal to explain what we just learned. What is the essential identity of Malchus? That you have a king who's a human being and is an entity of his own. And for many years, he could have been a person that nobody even knew, or definitely someone in his own private domain, and wasn't necessarily served as king over the people. So what essentially creates him being a king, that there's some iskashrus, or as he calls it here, there's some ischabrus, that this melech, who's an entity of his own, the Am, the nation, and they're an entity of their own. What happened here when you became melech? Nothing new happened. You don't have a third entity. You just have that these two entities called the king and the nation and the people and the empire, or the melucha, kingdom, joined together, that he is now king on the Am. The Kedem shenisman l'melech, before he was appointed king, lo hoyina melucha. There was no kingship, at least from this king. The king was separate and the nation was separate. And through them joining together, meaning that the Am crowns the king and they accept him as their king. And the king accepts being a king over the people. You need both. So when you have that, that is Chabris, that's called Malchus. That's Pasha B'Gashmis. So Malchus, did it add anything new? It added a new dimension, a connection between two entities. But like he said, so that's in the be'emes ein ze ischatshus. In truth, there is no ischatshus here. There's no real new innovation, new novel creation here. Because the melech has the midah of melucha before. Because you could argue, you know what, when the king was a private citizen, or he wasn't yet king over these people, maybe he didn't have malchus within him. But that's not the case. A true melech is not like Achashverosh, for example, or others that just grab the power. He has melucha within him. It's just not revealed. He's not expressing it. Just like we say when the Rebbe became Rebbe. So it's true that it gets certain keiches, certain strengths. But a Rebbe is born, has certain features that makes him just like Moshe Rabbeinu, didn't suddenly become at 80 years old capable of being a leader. He had leadership quality from much earlier on. However, it wasn't activated. It didn't come up in Gilead yet. So like it's written, like it says elsewhere. And through this connection and attachment of the melech and the nation and the people, that caused that there should be a revelation that this inyan melucha of kingship, of leadership, should be revealed, that he should actually melech aleim, he should rule over them, he should govern and govern over them. And the kingship is what connects them. Because if you take away melucha here, they're not in the same league. A king is completely different league. He would have no relationship with his people if he didn't accept being king and they didn't accept him as king. So now they have a relationship. The relationship consists of he's the king of these people. Because the melech fundamentally, on the core level, is Ram v'Nosei, he's exalted and above, and relatively speaking, he's muvdal from the Am. They're not in the same league, same dimension. That from his shoulders and above, he's higher than the entire nation. It doesn't just mean physical height; it also means in quality. He's on a different caliber, different league, a different dimension, different quality. So that's what he is on his own. So melucha is what creates the connection. And therefore there is no ischatshus, because melucha was there already before. What is this chiddush is that the connection is there. That is a chiddush. Like he said, the chiddush is in their connection between them. Nimshal Khan, so now this was the mashal of Kingship Below. In the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab comes to qualify something. The Nimshal Khan, in the moral here, meaning in the Nimshal, this is example, that is only an example. How it is Lamaila, who Shasfiris Atzmim, that Silus Muvdalim Be'erech Mebchinis Biyah. Okay, I see he's coming to qualify something important. Trying to understand exactly what he's trying to say. Saying that the nimshal, the mashal, the melucha itself, Malchus, is above the Am. But that's fine. Malchus of Atzilus is higher than B'riyah, than Biyah. In the nimshal, he says, the Sefiros Atzmim of Atzilus, Muvdalim Be'erech Mebchinis Biyah, they are separate from the level of Biyah, the Ikram Bebchinas Aliyah. And they're primarily in a state, the Ikram in a state of Aliyah. That sounds very similar to what he said in the top of the page by the Masois, that the Sefiros on their own without Malchus are 42 Masois, because you don't count Malchus, because Malchus is Gili.
This is
give me a moment. Let me just a moment. Please, let me give me a moment to think it through. So the spheres themselves of Atzilus are muvdalim. The king in the mashal is also, his faculties are also separate from the people. He's on a higher level.
Like you said about the Rebbe, before he was Rebbe.
Well, it could be, but he's saying here is, because it threw me when he says V'hanimshal, but the mashal is also like that. The faculties of the king, let's not talk about his melucha right now. His chachma, his bina, his das, his chesed, is moved on makalam. When you say shichmim mamayla, means his whole personality is on a different level. That's very clear. In the nimshal, okay, the nimshal, he's spelling out the nimshal, that this is referring to the spheres in the melech. In Malchus, there's chachma, bina, all these spheres, be'etzem, they're moved completely from biyah. The ikram b'chinas aliyah commission is bar b'dibra maschel vayigash anal. Where's vayigash? Where did he quote vayigash? Oh, on the previous page. I want to look up what it says in the Maimar Vayigash, because right here he said Malchus So in other words, okay, I understand what he's saying. If the melech did not agree, let's start from the way it is below. If a melech did not agree, or before he became king, he was on a superior level, like we know about the Rebbe. He was on a different level of other people. He didn't mingle with them. It was a completely different caliber. His koiches were, in a sense, in the state of aliyah, because they're not going down to the am, to the people. So this, in the nimshal, it goes like this. The spheres that would ultimately, the spheres of Atzilus on their own, without Malchus, because Malchus is already a connection between those spheres and Biyah and Bria. The spheres on their own, like the faculties of the king, are in a state of Havdalah, Muvdalim from Biyah. And indeed, the Ikram, and they're primarily in a state of Aliyah. They're not in a state of Yerida. Like, for example, when Chesed of Atzilus is functioning, its goal is not about bringing Chesed into Biyah. Its goal is to transmit divine Chesed, to express the divine kindness. Same thing with Chachma, Bina, and all the spheres. And that's where he cites from Vayigash. It is the Malchus, the Malchus of Atzilus, that brings those spheres into a play and connects them to Biyah, like it is with the king. When the king chooses and is appointed king, and he agrees to be a king, so on his own, he would be removed, like you said. HaMelech be'etzem ram v'noseh, removed al-be'erech, and Meluchu mechaber esesam. Okay, that's how it works, yeah. V'hamelucha, then after the parentheses, it continues. V'hamelucha, hainu b'chinas hates malchus, v'ika b'chinas parts of ha-malchus. And Melucha, what is Melucha? Those are the 10 Malchus, the Malchus within each of the spheres, but primarily it's the very sphere, parts of Malchus itself, in Atzilus, the 10th sphere. That's why I said I think he means Es and Malchus with the 10th. He ha-mechaber say some. So just like in the Moshel, the concept of kingship connects something that on its own would be separate, like the spheres of Atzilus would be separate and removed from Biyah. And now Malchus, the Melucha, connects him and the nation, the same thing. It connects, Malchus of Atzilus connects Atzilus to Biyah. There we have. And the same thing in Malchus Lamaila, that is the connection, the joining of, and that connects and joins Atzilus with Bria. This connection, in other words, that this Malchus becomes through this connection. What he's adding with that is that it goes both ways. Remember, the corner cannot be a corner until you have two things that meet. So first the two things meet, and where do they meet? That's what Malchus is. Malchus emerges in order to join them together. And it joins the two together. So which one comes first? The two entities or the Malchus? It sounds like it goes both ways. That when Atzilus is ready to be joined to Biyah, that's where Malchus emerges to do the joining. Like the cornerstone or the corner point that connects to, and that's the Chiddush, the Ischabrus. Okay, that's the point he makes here. Good.
Rom v'niso, not v'nosoi.
Rom v'niso. Okay. Good. Any questions? Any questions? So, okay, so he finished this. So he finished the circle explaining Malchus like Kerem, the Yoram Kerem Mashiach. Now he's going to continue in explaining about this connection and attachment of these two levels. Now, just for the record, it's critical to point out all this is coming to explain, of course, interface. Remember, it's all about the interface. In this case, he's coming to explain ultimately that Malchus is going to connect all the way to the highest levels of Hela Ma'atzmi. But even in the very basic level, what he's discussing here is an interface. Malchus is the interface between Atzilus and Biyah. But he's not finished yet with the whole discussion of Malchus itself, because, as we know, this whole point that we're discussing here is not just that we eliminate enemies, but we transform them. That the very darkness and the very lower levels are transformed, and that's through Malchus, because Malchus reaches all the way up in the Helam and the Helam Ha'atzmi, like he explained in the previous pages. So let's not forget that key point in this discussion here. Just one moment here. Okay. BT.
I have a question, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, when it says V'yam Karen Mashiach, and he's here to explain Karen, thoroughly. Is it a remez that to the what's going to happen Lasi Lavo, where he's going to raise these junctions up from the bottom to the top, and that's where Hashem Yechat Meriv, he's going to transform, not just defeat or subjugate, but transform the lowest levels into the highest levels. And I have to say I cheated because we went ahead of you, but I'm asking you, Dafka, about the Yaron Kerem Mashiach. Is that the remez?
It's more than a remez. He said it explicitly. You don't even have to cheat. Just go back to the bottom of 1299, and he says it explicitly.
Okay.
If you look at the bottom of 1299, we began to speak about V'yiten Eiz L'malkoi, the Yoram Kerem Mashiach. He says exactly. The Yoram Kerem Mashiach, I'm Shachim B'chinas Malchus B'chinas Helam Ha'atzmi, and this is more than just Gilui Atzmis. I'm reading from the bottom of page 1299, and he will get back to it. Correct. So all this says that is correct. He's going to get back to it, but right now he's still focusing on. I just wanted to put it in context so everyone should remember what the beginning and end of this subject is. But now he's going to continue in understanding the Ischabrus of this Keren of Malchus. Okay. V'hine Yedua.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. The new paragraph is V'hine Yedua, and now it's known, the B'schabrus Beis Madreges, that when there's the joining of two levels, something happens when two levels are joined. Like when you join this a southern wall with an eastern wall, it's true that something happens. You create a corner in a room. If you want to have any type of normal structure, you need to have corners. If they don't meet, you don't have a normal structure. So if you want to have a square or a rectangle or whatever, you need to have things joining together. But he's going to explain, obviously, in Ruchnius, it's even deeper than that. It says the joining of two levels, when there's the joining of two levels, nimshach aleim eir hageveya mishneim. What's drawn down upon them is a level that's higher than both of them. And that third dimension, he doesn't call it third dimension, but that will call that synergy, or that higher level of energy that's higher than both of them, is the interface that joins them together. So, for example, when you talk about a translator, someone that translates Hebrew and English, so that translator has to have something that neither the English-speaking person or the Hebrew-speaking person has, and that's what allows him to join them together. He knows both languages. Obviously, he's going to talk even deeper than that, because there you could just say it's the sum total of two languages. But the truth is, like he says, it's a higher Eir HaGaveya. Ukiyadua, Be'in Zocher Nekeva Baram, Vayevarach Esam. So having the verse right in the beginning of Bereshis, on the sixth day of creation, so it says God created them male and female and blessed them. So he's going to explain that Zocher and Nekeva are two entities, and the blessing creates something that's higher than both of them. That this is the blessing, that when the Zocher and Nekeva come together, this is the crown that the mother crowns them in the day of their marriage. The crown is far, far higher than the level of Zah. It's interesting, he just said it's higher than Zah. He doesn't say it's higher than Malchus. Isn't Zocher Nekeva Zah and Malchus? Or are Zocher Nekeva here all within Zah? I have to go back and see how this was explained earlier. If you remember, there were the three levels where Malchus is lower than Zah, and then it's called Biti, the daughter. Then it's called Achesi. It's called Achesi, like a sister equal to Zah. And then there's Imi that's higher than Zah. And then we even learned that's higher even than Imi. We'll get back to it. Meanwhile, he's saying that this crown that is crowned upon them, that the mother crowns them in the day of their marriage, is far higher than Zah. And this crown is drawn down or manifests dafka, specifically in the day of their marriage, Malchus, in order to create the joining of Zah and Malchus. That's why I was assuming that Zocher and Nekeva would be Zah and Malchus. In order to join them, you need something higher. And that's what comes down to Atara that comes higher. Let's read inside and we'll see how he's explaining it. The same thing.
It has, Rabbi Jacobson. He talks about it on page 1215. I mean, it might be helpful. Like it seems to me that's where he's explaining it at a higher level.
I know what he says there. Yeah, that I know. It doesn't help here for this purpose. We know that the Torah is higher, that's for sure. My question was not about the crown, it was about Malchus. The whole topic begins, it's the whole subject that he began, where he spoke about the Medrash from Shiur and Rabbi. That's what you're referring to?
I think so. Top of page 1215.
I don't think
Midas Hamlochahu Mitzada Malas of Nefesh Hu Marom Be'esam. And then it goes on and says, Lachana Midas Shehem Bechinas Gilui Behan Nefesh Harei Skalas Shalahem Hu Dankan Bechinas Kiru Bechinas Gilui or Pnimi. Umidas Hamalchus Shehu Bechinas Koach Nivdal Harei Zeba Bechinas Richuk Bechinas Makiv Levad. Lachan Nikra Malchus B'Shem Itra. The Iker Inyan Hamluchahu Hakeser Malchus Vahinu Itra.
That's not really relevant. That's not really relevant here. That's not really relevant here. If you want to have where he discussed it, really the place that's relevant here is on page later. Okay, you know what? I don't want to go there right now because it's going to just
1248.
confuse matters.
1248.
1265. 1249 and on is where he really spoke about it at length.
Yeah.
Okay. So
sorry to throw you off.
The beginning Malchus Shisima Atzilus, that the level of Malchus was the end of Atzilus, Vascholos Abriya, and the beginning of Abriya, Umechaber Sesam, and connects and attaches them, She Gevei Mishneim. So just like we say about Zocher Nekeva, that it comes from that Torah, the crown that is higher, the same thing you say with Malchus. Okay, I understand now. So just like Chibur of Zoh and Malchus comes from a higher level of Torah, the same thing in Malchus, the fact that Malchus attaches and connects Atzilus and is the beginning of Bria. And Bria, you have to say that it comes from a level that's Gavoya Mishneim, that's higher than both of them. V'hu shebe'emes b'chinas ha-Malchus shorsha Gavoya l'mayla mechol ha-tesfira shel l'mayla memena. And that is because in truth, the level of Malchus, its root, is higher than all the 9 spheres that precede it. All the 9 spheres that are higher than Malchus, like we've been discussing. In Giluyim, the 9 spheres are higher because they have substance and they have an identity. But in the root, Malchus is rooted in a place that's higher than them. Okay, so what he basically did here, which was a little, that's what confused me. The fact that he brought Zocher and Nekeva, he was saying, so just like the blessing that comes when in the day of a marriage of male and female, of a chas and a kala, comes from a higher level, that's the crown that the mother weaves, the mother places, and it comes from Imay, that's higher than Zoh. And that gives the power to join Zoh and Malchus. The same thing with Malchus, that since Malchus is joining Atzilus and Bria, or Bria, so that comes from a higher level, and that's why Malchus is rooted higher than the 9 spheres. That's why he can join the 9 spheres of Atzilus and all of Atzilus with Bria. Like it says in Eitz Chaim, the 9 spheres of Atzilus are rooted in Arich, in Keser, the lower level of Keser. Malchus is rooted in Reisha, the Lo Yisyada, which is the head that's the unknown, beyond the head that the super rational Reisha, the Lo Yisyada, that's unknown, which is usually the level of Atik higher than Arich. U'kameshin is bar le'il. So that's what it says explicitly in Eitz Chaim. So even though the Malchus is, when it emerges, it's the lowest of the spheres, but its root is higher than the other spheres. And that's why it has the power. And with this power, that's rooted all the way in Radl'o, all the way in the highest levels, Malchus attaches and connects Atzilus and Biyah. So now he's introducing this idea that in order to connect the two, it comes from a higher place. Till now, he was just explaining how Malchus is the same level as a Keren Zovius, like a corner point, that there's no Chiddush, and yet it joins 2 things. In this paragraph, he's explaining how that's rooted, that comes from a higher strength, a higher place, which of course is going to lead us to understanding what means V'yarim Keren Mashiach in the context of the Helam Ha'atzmi and everything we've been learning. And like he writes in Teira Er, the Alter Rebbe, it's right in the beginning, in Bereshis. So there's a mimer there that's called B'dibra Maschel. In the mimer, the discourse that begins, Se'eno Re'eno. Go out and see. And he's talking there about this topic. So what he discusses there is Be'inyan B'melech Shleima Shashalom Shalei. Down below in the footnote, they say, should probably say B'melech Shleima because that's the full expression. But what does it say about Melech Shleima? Is that the King Solomon, Shleima HaMelech, came after David HaMelech. He's called Shleima. One of the reasons is because Shalom Shalei, in his time, reigned peace. David HaMelech was a time of wars. There were many wars. And that's one of the reasons, actually, that David was not able to be the one that actually put up the Beis HaMikdash. He only prepared the ground for it because of the blood that was shed in those wars. Shleima, on the other hand, is called Shalom Shalei. So he says there in Teireh that this refers to Shakayach Shebchinis Malchus Lechaber Atzilus in Bria, that the level of Malchus has the power to attach and connect Atzilus with Bria, Shein Shnei Hofchim, which is that this power of Malchus to connect. I should read the song a little differently. He says there in Teireh that this power in Malchus to connect Atzilus and Bria, which are two opposites, Shein Shnei Hofchim, who shesharshem b'chinas Malchus the Ain Sof, is due to the fact that Malchus is rooted in Malchus of Ain Sof. That's Malchus before the Tzimtzum. The lowest level, the levels, the Ain Sof before the Tzimtzum, it's called Malchus of Ain Sof. The Rebbe Rashab adds, that's the level of b'chinas Ani Rishon Shen is Bar Le'il. Now, where was Ani Rishon explained earlier? What I remember is all the way in the beginning of this volume. So he explained Ani Rishon, Ani Achron. I'll just refer you what page that is. It is, we began discussing on page right here, page 1211. He began middle of the page. He says, we'll understand this by first explaining Ani Rishon, Ani Achron. I correct myself. On page 1213. So if you look at 1213, around the middle of the page, he begins Ani Rishon and Ani Achron. And that continues for a while. And then he goes back to it again on page 1217. Yeah. 1217 and 1218. But I believe also later on, he came back to it as well. I don't remember what page right now, but regardless, so Ani Rishon, Ani Achron, Achron refers to Malchus, Rishon refers to Keser Malchus, or the highest level in Malchus of Ain Sof. So even though Malchus of Atzilus is the last and the 10th of the spheres in Atzilus, and a level of Giluyim and revelation is the last of the spheres, but it's rooted all the way in Malchus of Ain Sof. That's what he brings from Teireh. And that's why it has the power to connect the two opposites of Atzilus and Bria. Like he said, in order to connect two things, you need to have a higher power. Just to bring it a little in Nigla language, before we read on, it's a famous explanation. The Rebbe brings it quite often as a whole sichus about it, that whatever you need to bring together two entities, especially two opposites, you need to have a third power that's greater than both of them. Because how do you hold them together? And one of the examples is marriage. Since a Zarcha and a Keva are so different, and compared actually to water and land, that's why it says, Koshel zivugam kekriyas yamsuf. It's difficult to bring together male, female, just as the parting of the sea. So that's just like the parting of the sea. The only way to do it was you needed God to intervene and intercede and bring a higher energy that would cause the wind to come and cause the waters to go to the side and allow Yabasha, land, to appear so the Jews can walk through it. So too, for a shidduch, you need to have a third power, like he said, Vayivarach Esam. You need a third higher power to bring them together. Now, when the Radl'o was learning this idea and explaining it in Talmudic terms, we call it Pu'ula Nimsheches, that in order to keep two opposites together, you cannot just do it one time. That's why the whole night you needed to have God keeping the wind and the water up, because water naturally falls down. So who's causing the water to not? So you need a force that's stronger than the water to keep it standing, like a wall, so they can walk through the waters. The same thing he explained, that when you have to bring together two opposites, it's not just enough to have one-time power during their wet marriage, but every moment has to be renewed, that power. So when he shared that chiddush with Rab Chaim Brisker, so Rab Chaim said to him, Mazel Tov. He said, why are you telling me Mazel Tov? He says, because based on your chiddush, then it means that every second, it's like you and your wife are being renewed your marriage. It's not a one-time thing that just lasts for a long time. It's constantly being renewed. Some say that the Radl'o responded, but the Mazel Tov that was said by the wedding is also being renewed all the time. Bottom line is that whenever you have to bring things together, especially opposites, you need a higher power that keeps them together. Here he now added the word opposites. Till now, he was just talking about being mechaber, atzilus, and bria. But now he said hofchim. So it's rooted from Malchus of Ain Sof, or like he said before, from Radl'o, which is the higher level than the 9 spheres, which is arich. B'hainu, this means which means that Malchus is rooted higher, much higher and higher in its root, also from the root of Atzilus. It has to be higher than Atzilus if it's going to attach and connect Atzilus and Bria. It needs to be something that's higher than Atzilus, and that's why it has the power to connect them. V'zehu, and this is the meaning what he said right at the beginning of the paragraph. And this is when we say that what we mean by saying when we say that we join two levels, this level gives birth to this higher level that's higher than both of them. So even though we said before there's no chiddush, because there's no new entity here, but what it does do, it gives manifestation to this higher energy that connects to both of them. Because then by connecting these two levels, Atzilus and Bria, Nimshach mebchinas Malchus the Ain Sof, it's that through doing that, withdrawing from Malchus of Ain Sof, Lies Malchuscha Malchus Kol Elomim. And that's what we say, Malchuscha. Your Malchus is the Malchus of all the worlds. What does that mean? Because the Malchus of all the worlds are lower levels. Malchuscha, Malchus of Ain Sof, is the root of all those levels of Malchus. She Malchus Atzilus, Mechaber Atzilus in Bria. It gives the power that Malchus of Atzilus, Malchuscha, Malchus Kol Elomim, gives the power that Malchus of Atzilus should connect Atzilus with Bria.
Rabbi, if I can ask, what does it mean, Malchus of Ain Sof? I mean, Ain Sof sounds like lifnei hatzimtzum, and there's no hagbala, there's no limitation or distinction lifnei hatzimtzum. At least, I mean, as I understand it, I don't understand that particular level, Malchus of Ain Sof. What is it like? What is it?
Well, the truth is, we spoke about this for hours upon hours long before you joined this class. Because in the beginning of Ayin Beis, he asked this question, and he explained the 10 hidden spheres are before the Tzimtzum. So the same question you could ask, what are the 10 hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum? So if you go back to volume 1, first of all, we have the classes up. You could definitely review it. So there he elaborates at length that it's all basically God's capacity, God envisioning the reality of after the Tzimtzum. So there's no real spheres there, but God is envisioning it all. So that's why very often you hear me describe the envisioning, or shir atzmei b'koyach, God allocating resources, like the artist envisioning the art. So in that context, he even goes further and says, so what does it mean, Malchus of Ain Sof? So he says, and what means the lowest level? So he says, lowest means the one that's already beginning to associate in God's so-called consciousness with the realities that will come after the Tzimtzum. So before the Tzimtzum, you have that envisioning. I think I definitely have explained it also from time to time, when I discuss Lifnei Tzimtzum, we talk about the fact that Chassidus reveals and teaches us about those levels. So there's also an actual long letter from a very powerful letter from the Rebbe that I gave in the Kollel, in that series that I'm doing now about Seder Shtalshus. I talked at length as well about Lifnei Tzimtzum, this point. And there's a letter from the Rebbe where he discusses levels before the Tzimtzum, what that means exactly. But just suffice it to say briefly, it's not actual levels, it's God's envisioning, and that God wanted to make it the system in a way that even after the Tzimtzum has a root in the levels before the Tzimtzum. Because you could ask the question about every time he's mentioned, I could count in my hand probably in the last months 30, 40 times, where he mentions B'Sheirish Sharshay, it's Lifnei Tzimtzum, the level of the Helem Ha'atzmi and the Helem and the Gili. So what you're asking, you could ask about every time he mentions that something is rooted before the Tzimtzum. If before the Tzimtzum there's nothing there, only seamlessness, why do he keep referring to levels before the Tzimtzum? Now, he did say it many times. And we actually discussed it at length at the end of volume 2, that there's the level before the Leis HaRatzon, before God desires, Sefiros saying Ketz, infinite spheres, then 10 hidden spheres. Then there's the desire. The desire itself goes through different stages, a general desire, a specific desire, until the last levels where God begins to envision the building, the structure that he's going to create. So all that goes into the same category of understanding how all this is in the divine consciousness, even before Tzimtzum and existence comes into being.
Got it. Thank you. It was a wonderful explanation. Thank you very much. And I do get it.
Okay, good.
Even though I didn't read that part in Chelik Aleph, but I understand exactly what you said. Thank you.
Okay, but now he qualifies. After saying that this higher level, the root of Malchus, manifests when it connects Atzilus and Bria, like the Koyach HaElyon Sheba Malchus, and this is critical, Hu B'Bchinas Helem. This greater strength of Malchus is not something that's in a revealed way. It's in a state of concealment. It's in a concealed state. T'cheinu be'etzem b'Bchinas Helem Ha'atzmi, Kamoshin is bar le'il. And that's how it is be'etzem and in the Helem Ha'atzmi. It's not just a concealment that's concealed compared to the level of revelation and just right there behind the closed door. It's fundamentally beyond revelation altogether. So this power is interestingly a power that does not really manifest in any revealed conscious way. It's there and it has the power to join two things together, like he says here, but it's on its own, it's a complete Helem Ha'atzmi. Commission is bar le'il, u'kamoi came b'machaz atzilus u'behelem. So just like in the root, the Helem Ha'atzmi is fundamentally concealed. The same thing in Atzilus, in Malchus of Atzilus, this power is in a state of concealment. This parenthesis can use explanation. I'll give explanation, but I just wanted to first read the pshat, and then we'll go back and we'll explain it. Uba lideis galus aideis chabers. But when you see that it joins two opposite worlds, basically when this material world, I'm just using my own, even though he's talking about Atzilus and Biyah, but when you take Biyah and you transform it into Elokus, where's that coming from? How's that possible? So that's where you reveal the Helem Ha'atzmi that on its own is completely concealed. When you come and bring it into a reality that is concealed and you connect that to the divine. Like in this case, when Atzilus and Bria are connected, that's when you reveal, then it comes Lideis Galus. Yeah. Okay. I think we should stop here because he's going to now go further, obviously further explaining this idea, but I'd rather stop here or else we're going to get stuck in the middle of the beginning of another dimension of discussion here. Yeah, we'll stop here. Anybody want to ask anything? So what he added now is, of course, vital to our discussion with Helem, that this is in a state of concealment, and it gets revealed when it creates this ischabrus. Yeah. I mean, a very basic level on a Balabatisha, simple way of explaining is that when we're in a state of crisis, God forbid, and a person has to exert themselves more than they usually do, what are they revealing? Hidden faculties, hidden strengths they didn't have before. So we have many strengths. The strings that are usually revealed are the ones in routine, part of our routine, part of our regular patterns. But when you have to suddenly, for whatever reason, there's resistance, there's an enemy, there's a battle to be fought, or there's a crisis to be dealt with, some setback, some adversity, then you dig deeper and you reveal powers that you wouldn't have known before. That's just on a very basic level here. Same thing here in Aved, what he's saying is that Malchus is on its own, it's concealed, but when it joins together, these two realities, two opposite realities, that inner strength and power, Malchus's root, is revealed. It's a little, obviously a lot more than this example, just a small example to help understand a bit. But let me stop again here. We'll stop here. Any questions? Okay. Well, this is going to lead ultimately to understanding what we spoke about, Ein Oid, that not only do we reveal the divine, Elokim, we don't just reveal the divine through the Kalim and through even this world after the Tzimtzum ultimately reveals also the divine, but that the very Tzimtzum, the very Helam and the Kalim themselves, they themselves are going to reveal the divine power of concealment, which is also a divine power and even a greater one, because it's greater because it reveals the divine that's beyond revelation. Revelation always has a shape and form. And this is going to allow us to experience something beyond shape and form, which is essentially what happens when we make a dira b'tachtenim. When you reveal God in Atzilus or in higher worlds, ultimately you're revealing a certain structure of it. It's when you come to a world like ours where there's no divine revelation, and there you reveal the divine, then you have to reveal a dimension that is beyond revelation, which is ultimately the purpose here. And it's the joining of these two together, Gili and Helam, that is really the ultimate Geula and Mashiach, when there'll be the joining of these two. The Helam Ha'atzmi will be Begili, as we're going to learn more at length as we go further, as we've learned already, but it's going to only develop more as we learn on. Okay, so we'll stop here, close to the bottom of page 1303, by the line, the Yudei, before the Hine Hischabrus. Okay. I'm sorry, no, one second, what did I say?